Hey everyone, it's Michael here and welcome to Maps and More. In this video I'm starting a completely new series which is going to go hand in hand with my other kind of geography and travel related videos. In this series specifically we're going to be talking about languages, kind of answering questions about why certain languages are the way they are, things like that. As with my other videos, if anyone has any kind of questions about the topics I cover or topics you want me to cover, please do kind of get in touch, comment, message me, whatever, and I'd be happy to do whether follow-up videos or just take people's advice on board for the future. Also, if you're interested, please do like and subscribe and kind of, engage so you can see more of these videos, and also encourages me to make more if I know that other people are interested. So hopefully you'll find this kind of series entertaining, educational and interesting, and enjoy going through it with me, whether you're a kind of casual viewer, interested in languages, studying linguistics or anything in between. So today's first video is going to be about the various languages of Spain, why there are so many, and kind of what these languages' relationship are with Standard Spanish. So the official national language of Spain is of course Spanish, but because there are various different languages in the peninsula, Standard Spanish can also be referred to as Castilian, named after the central Castile region, as well as the former Kingdom of Castile, which ruled most of that area during the medieval and early modern periods. In addition to Castilian Spanish, there are 5 co-official languages in Spain in various different regions of the country. These are Catalan, Valencian, Galician, Basque, and Aranese. In addition to these kind of 5 co-official languages, there are a variety of sort of unofficial regional languages and dialects, which are probably spoken by very few people nowadays, but were historically more widespread, languages like Astur-Leonese and Aragonese, and there's also various unique dialects of Spanish like Andalus and Canarian as well. So almost all of these languages in Spain, with the important exception of Basque, which we'll get to later, are what we call Romance languages, along with French, Italian, Romanian, many smaller regional languages like Sardinian, and other languages across southern Europe as well. The name Romance doesn't have anything to do with kind of love and Valentine's, all the rest of it, but rather the Roman Empire, which ruled most of the territory of kind of the Mediterranean, southern Europe and Spain. Specifically, the Romance languages are descended from kind of vernacular, common, or vulgar Latin, as we say, while classical Latin kind of develops into medieval Latin, became the language of the church and sort of official royalty, things like that in the Middle Ages. So there are a few historical reasons that Castilian Spanish became the dominant language in Spain, ahead of these other kind of Latin-descended languages in the Iberian Peninsula. So I'll do a separate video on kind of medieval Spain and the Islamic influence there specifically, but for now it's worth knowing that the territory of Spain in the Middle Ages was split into broadly 3 sections. One was the Islamic rule, which started with the Caliphate of Cordoba and originally covered the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula, but over 700 years of kind of war and reconquest was slowly eroded, eventually only occupying a small corner in the south in Granada before being kind of conquered completely. Second major component of Spain was Kingdom or Crown of Aragon, which ruled the entire kind of east coast of Spain, what we now know as Catalonia and Valencia, as well as various other parts of the Mediterranean, the Balearic Islands, even Sardinia and Sicily for a while. And the final component of medieval Spain, which is important when it comes to Spanish language, was the Kingdom of Castile, Kingdom of Castile and Leon, which covered the territory of northern, central, and eventually southern Spain. So when the Muslim rulers were eventually defeated in the 15th century, the 2 Christian kingdoms of Aragon and Castile united in the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabel. While officially the 2 kingdoms were equal partners in the union, over time Castile became the dominant force in Spain, and kind of the modern unified Spanish nation that we know today was born. In addition, central Spain, the cities of Toledo, Valladolid, and eventually Madrid, became the capital cities of the new Spanish state, and so the Castilian language that was spoken in these areas became the official national language, while the languages spoken, for example, in the former lands of Aragon, became kind of officially less important. The Islamic rule did, however, leave a large imprint on the Spanish language, as many words and phrases were borrowed from Arabic during this time into Castilian Spanish. So words like almohada, which means pillow, aceituna, which means olive, these are both kind of Arabic-derived words, as are hundreds or even potentially thousands of other words in Spanish. There's even a Spanish term, ojalá, which is derived from the Arabic phrase inshallah, meaning God willing, and it has its own construction in Spanish with the what we call grammatical subjunctive. So for example, if you were wishing that you could do something but you can't, or wishing that something were real but it's not, you might say, ojalá pudiera nadar, which means, I wish I could swim. You can also use it for things in the future, things that you hope will happen, such as ojalá no llueva mañana, which means I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Some unique features of Spanish are the placement of diphthongs, so two vowels together, where other Romance languages just keep one long vowel. For example, puerta, meaning door, whereas in Portuguese, that's porta, in French it's porte. In Spanish you can say tiempo, which means time, instead of tempo in Portuguese, or temps in French. Then there's also the loss of the initial F in Latin, as filius became hijo, that means son. And fabulare became hablar, so that's to talk or to speak. Another example that I'll give right now is the palatalization of the Latin double N and L. For example, anno, which we kind of know in the phrase anno domini, means year. In Spanish that became año, and Latin caballos became caballo, that means horse. Finally, probably one of the biggest defining features of Spanish compared to other Latin languages, particularly European Spanish, is something which we call thetheo. This is a feature where C and Zs are pronounced with the dental fricative, so in other words a th sound, like thought in English. As such, words you might commonly kind of use like chorizo and Barcelona should both have a th sound in the middle. An urban legend claims that this phenomenon came from a Spanish Castilian king in kind of the 15th, 16th century who had a lisp. Whether that's true or not, don't really know, probably not. But whatever the truth of it, this development can be traced to around that time in the 15th and 16th century. Even so, many varieties of Spanish don't use thetheo, particularly outside of Europe, so Latin American Spanish is the biggest part of that, and pretty much all varieties of Latin American Spanish pronounce C's and Z's with an S sound. So you think of words like Venezuela, also a name like Garcia in Latin America would be pronounced Garcia, and in Europe, in Spain, is pronounced as Garcia. Final little note to put on this is actually even within Spain and European Spanish, some parts of particularly Andalusia in the south actually pronounce their Z and C in the Latin American way, with an S, so they would locally say Andalusia instead of Andalusia, for example. There are of course many other kind of various unique features of Spanish I don't really have time to go into right now, but these things do help to make Spanish unique amongst the neighbours, and amongst even the other languages in Spain itself. Speaking of other languages in Spain, we're now going to move into talking a bit about the Catalan language, which is the next largest language in Spain after Castilian. As the name suggests, language is primarily spoken in the autonomous region of Catalonia, but it's also an official language in the Balearic Islands, as well as the microstate of Andorra, which sits kind of on the Spanish-French border in the Pyrenees. Valencian may also be considered a variety of Catalan, but we'll come to that later. In recent years, the Catalan language has experienced a resurgence as it was repressed under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco in the mid-20th century. Interestingly, while Catalan is a Latin-based Romance language like Castilian Spanish, it may actually kind of be classified in what we call the Gallo-Romance branch, which would make it more like French than actually standard Spanish. Some linguists maybe disagree with this categorization, would put it in the Ibero-Romance group along with standard Spanish, but nevertheless there are various features that Catalan shares with French and not with Spanish. Historically, Catalan developed as a separate language from the time of the County of Barcelona, which was around the 10th century. Over time, Catalonia became united with the Crown of Aragon, we talked about earlier, which was one of the two senior partners of the United Kingdom of Spain. The Catalan language then hit something of a golden age in the 13th and 14th centuries, which is also when the reach and sort of power of the Aragonese crown was at its strongest. Catalan at that time was spoken not only in present-day Spain, Catalonia, but also Sardinia, Sicily, Corsica, even kind of Naples region, which was under the Spanish Aragonese rule at the time. One of the defining pieces of Catalan literature at this point is Tirant lo Blanc, by the Valencian author Joanot Martorell, if I'm pronouncing that right. This novel is written on the kind of theme of chivalry, 115 years before Spain's most defining and important literary work on the subject, Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. And Cervantes was actually heavily inspired by this Catalan novel, Tirant lo Blanc. Following the Spanish Golden Age in the 15th, 16th centuries and the consolidation of central Castilian authority in Spain, the Catalan language and identity fell into decline, and after the War of the Spanish Succession, 1714, Castilian Spanish was imposed on all legal documents across Spain, so Catalan lost any sort of official status that it might have had previously. While the language did begin a slow revival around the 19th century, under the dictatorship of Franco between 1936 and 1975, the language was again suppressed on an official level, although culturally, unofficially, the language did continue its revival during that period, particularly in things like the arts. Since the transition to democracy in the 1970s following Franco's death, Catalan has again become official in Catalonia and enjoys a heavy presence in all Catalan kind of media, local governance, schools, things like that. While not all Catalan speakers are pro-independence, the revival of the language has contributed to an increased awareness of Catalan identity in general, and has become a symbol of Catalan sort of cultural independence perhaps, if not really political. Some linguistic features in Catalan include the non-use of diphthongs. We talked about that in Spanish earlier. So in words like temps and pedra means stone, temps means time, in which it follows the single vowel that likes of Portuguese and French have, as opposed to in Spanish where you would say tiempo and piedra. Also, the plural article in Catalan is els for masculine instead of the Spanish los. So, for example, els gats, if I'm pronouncing that right, means the cats, whereas in Spanish that would be los gatos. Also, there's a dropping of the final n following long vowels. So, for example, pla means flat. It comes from the word plana and the word canso, meaning song. This kind of final word is a feature in which Catalan displays similarities to French. So in French, for the word for song is chanson, and we can't get that nasal dropping of the final n, whereas in Catalan you've got canson as well. In Spanish you say canción, so you would pronounce the n at the end, and that's a way that Catalan kind of diverges from Spanish. Additionally, there are many sort of alveopalatal j and j consonants, such as in the word playa, for example, which means beach. So compare playa, the Catalan, to the French plage and the Spanish playa. So the next co-official language, which we will cover perhaps a bit quickly, is Valencian. Although linguistically speaking, Valencian really is just a dialect or variety of Catalan. Valencian is a West Catalan dialect, so generally Catalan is split into East and West, with Barcelona and Mallorca speaking the Eastern dialect. The famous adage is that language is a dialect with an army, and while it's not quite the case with Valencian, of course, it is true that the definition of a language versus a dialect is as much a political one as a linguistic one. So as such, while the Valencian Language Academy officially admits Valencian to be another name for Catalan, a poll in 2004 showed that a majority of people in the Valencian community actually considered Valencian to be a separate language on its own. However, as this poll had a large kind of difference in the response from various age groups, it is possible that most Valencians nowadays fall into the Catalan side of the debate, as that's where most younger people in 2004 in that poll put their opinions. So aside from just the language, Valencia has a strong regional identity centered around the city itself and its kind of unique history. Valencia spent 200 years during the period of Islamic rule as an independent taifa, kind of independent kingdom, with its own independent rule. During this time, one of Spain's most famous medieval figures, El Cid, held the city kind of as his own personal fiefdom. Following Valencia's incorporation into the Crown of Aragon, along with, Catalonia, the region continued to be referred to as the Kingdom of Valencia within the overall jurisdiction of the Aragonese and then eventually Spanish crown. There are also some unique elements of Valencian culture. So, for example, there's a historic ceramic industry, which is particularly based in the region of Castellón and Villarreal, north of Valencia. And there's also some unique Gothic architecture in the region, which you can see, for example, in Valencia's cathedral. As well as this, though, perhaps the most famous Valencian cultural element that Valencia has given the world is paella, the traditional rice dish, which we kind of associate a lot with perhaps seafood. But actually a proper Valencian paella should really kind of have chicken, rabbit, not seafood, not chorizo either. Though in many other parts of Spain, you will find all sorts of paella. It's only in Valencia that maybe there's this kind of very proud feeling about traditional proper Valencian paella. The cultural heritage in Valencia probably influences the consideration of Valencian as its own language, separate to Catalan. Again, showing how language is used more as a representation of both politics and cultural identity, as opposed to purely being a linguistic categorization. So the next language of Spain that I want to talk about is Galician. Galician, or Gallego, is spoken by about 58% of the population of Galicia, which is one of Spain's autonomous communities and located in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. It is an Ibero-Romance language like Spanish, possibly Catalan. However, it's actually most closely related to Portuguese. In fact, because of the history of Galicia and Spain's reconquest of Iberia from the Islamic rule, it could almost be said that Portuguese is actually a form of Galician rather than the other way around. This is because Galicia, as part of the Kingdom of Leon, originally ruled the territory of modern-day Porto, northern Portugal, and spread the Galician language into that area. As this Galician-speaking county Portugal expanded into the formerly Muslim-held areas in the south of Portugal, places like Lisbon, the language spread with it and developed into the form that we now know as modern Portuguese. The two languages really diverged fully around the 14th century, by which time the Kingdom of Portugal was well established and Portuguese national identity separate from Galicia was much stronger. So despite being spoken for maybe over 1,000 years, the Galician language wasn't really standardized or officially coded until the 18th century, which is when the first Galician dictionaries were published. And it wasn't used in schools, legal documents, things like that, until after Franco's death in 1975. Despite this, the spoken status of Galician in day-to-day life had been strong throughout the centuries. So some linguistic features of Galician include the voiced and voiceless sibilants of sh and j. There are also some diphthongs where in Spanish there aren't. So for example, caixa in Galician, which means box, whereas in Spanish you would just say caja with one vowel. And queso, which means cheese in Galician. In Spanish that's queso. There's also the more rounded and front-ended vowels at the end of many words. So for example, in Spanish, campo, meaning field, becomes pronounced like campo in Galician. There's also a feature where plosives such as g become approximants except when they follow a nasal consonant. So, for example, un gato is pronounced with a g after the n consonant, but o gato with a r sound is after the vowel. Finally, while Galician is most closely related to Portuguese, Galicia's status within Spain and the contact through bilingualism in the region has brought a lot of features over from Spanish into Galician that are not found in Portuguese. An example of this is what we call yeísmo, where the ly sound, the ly, becomes y, as in the example of the word orgulloso in Spanish, which means proud. In Portuguese, you would say orgulhoso. You pronounce the L, which you don't in Spanish, and you don't in Galician either. So the last official language I'm going to talk about is the Basque language. As Basque is so very unique in Europe, I'm not going to be able to go into great detail or give a lot of examples. I'm not very familiar with the language. Indo-European is more my thing. But it is worth talking about the status and history of the language and Basque culture and identity in general as well. As well as the Basque country within Spain, or the País Vasco, the Basque cultural region extends into sections of Navarra and even in southwestern France, where there are around 51,000 Basque speakers, in addition to the 700,000 living in the Spanish Basque region. When it comes to classification, Basque is an entirely unique language in Europe, and is what we call a language isolate, which means it has no known modern relatives and no other language that is similar to it. There are many theories about Basque's relation to other languages and its origins, including even to languages like Georgian and Chechen, all the way in the Caucasus Mountains near Russia. It is probable the language predates the Indo-European migration into Western Europe, so could be thousands of years old, and really has maintained its independent and unique status for millennia. Part of the reason for Basque language and identity surviving so long is because of the geography of the region. There are many mountains, both to the south, west, and east, which have made the Basque region resistant to conquest over the years, whether that was, Celts, Romans, or the Muslim rulers in the 7th century. In the modern day, Basque kind of linguistic and regional identity is very strong, even to the stage where one of Spain's largest football teams, for example, Athletic Bilbao, has a policy of only signing or playing players from the Basque cultural area on either the Spanish or the French side. So circling back to linguistics and languages, as with Galician, the Basque language does exhibit some influence from Spanish, particularly in the borrowing of loan words. So for example, gauza, which means thing, comes from the Spanish word cosa. Grammatically and fundamentally, however, it remains completely unique. In modern day Spain, around 33% of the Basque country consider themselves fluent in Basque, compared to about 20% of the overall Basque region and 12% of the population of Navarra. While these are the main 5 languages of Spain, there are several other historical and regional languages that I will briefly mention now, but not really go into much detail. So these are Aranese, which is co-official in Catalonia, although only around 2,000 or even less native speakers remain, primarily in the Val d'Aran region. There's also Aragonese, which historically was very important as one of the kind of main languages of the Crown of Aragon, along with Catalan. Though in the present day there are perhaps 10,000 active speakers, and a few thousand more with some passive understanding of the language. The last language I'll mention quickly is Astur-Leonese, which was historically spoken in sort of northwest Spain, in what is today's Asturias and Cantabria, even parts of Extremadura and central Spain, but it's now classified as an endangered language. So that's it. I hope you've really enjoyed this video and found it interesting and educational. I've really enjoyed both writing and recording it, and I am excited to bring a variety of kind of geography and linguistic topics to you in the future. I have so many videos planned. I'm not sure which one I'm going to do next, but I'm excited to bring it to you either way. So I hope you're maybe looking forward to those. Like I said, do like and subscribe if you're interested. Do get in touch. And until then, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.